What makes a zone in Warcraft enjoyable, rewarding to play through, or for whatever reason, just good, deserving of another visit and worth remembering? Is it the lore and story setting, the quests, the player interactions you had there, the music and ambiance, the cozy feeling it gives you, or the memories and nostalgia it brings to the surface? Whether you're still playing today, or have moved on and are reliving your glory days vicariously through the internet, everyone who has played WoW has memories of the game that are simply inseparable from the places we journey through as players. Maybe that means long adventures with a party to get to a faraway dungeon, going back to your starter zone to buy your first mount, or just that sense of wonder you had, looking at the areas you never got to explore and never quite had an explanation for. Encampments, towns, cities, enemy strongholds, and wide open expanses. Zones are the building blocks that make up the world of Azeroth, and give us as players a canvas to write our experiences, adventures, and memories on, be they old or new. Whatever it might be for you, there's something special about every zone in World of Warcraft, something that makes each one unique. Welcome to the Zone Retrospective series, where I attempt to capture the essence of what it is exactly that makes each zone in WoW so memorable and so timeless. Each episode, I'll pick another of our favorite zones in Azeroth and review its history and lore, map layout and design, standout quests and loot, player interactions, and a few of my personal memories to hopefully answer the question, what is it that makes this place so special? In today's episode, we'll be visiting the Hillsbrad Foothills, one of the few territories in Lordaeron still controlled by humans and untainted by the Scourge. Loved for its rolling green pastures, peaceful environment, and grindy quests, but infamous for its PvP bloodshed, which has been known at times to escalate into hours-long, server-wide battles that would leave no place safe for the unfortunate souls just trying to get a few levels there. In the distant past, Hillsbrad was actually part of the Kingdom of Erethdor, which had its center of power at Strom in the Arathi Highlands, but that full history is better suited to a zone retro of the Highlands itself. For this video, I'll skip to the more recent histories, which began when the Kingdom of Erethdor splintered, its king going south to found Stormwind, and the remaining nobles settling the northern territories to establish the kingdoms of Gilneas, Alterac, Kultiras, and Lordaeron, which over time would come to hold dominion over the majority of the northern eastern kingdoms, including the Hillsbrad Foothills. It's during this period that Hillsbrad, despite its serene environment, would gain its reputation for being an area steeped in bloody conflict in the Battle of Hillsbrad that took place there during the Second War. By the way, whenever you see First War, Second War, or Third War in a Warcraft video, those roughly map to the RPG games, so First War is Warcraft 1, Second War, Warcraft 2, Third War is Warcraft 3, and so on. Hopefully that helps you place things going forward if you didn't know. The Battle of Hillsbrad is significant for quite a few reasons, but perhaps most importantly is that it's the first time the earliest manifestation of the Alliance fought together against what would ultimately become the Horde. On the Alliance side, the 7 human kingdoms comprised of Stormwind, Lordaeron, Gilneas, Alterac, Dalaran, Stromgarde, and Kultiras, together with the High Elves of Quel'Thalas, against the Old Horde, which was almost entirely comprised of blood-cursed orcs, who, at the time, were still heavily using dark magic, to the extent that they had Death Knights on the battlefield. Though they did have ogre allies, and through the events that unfolded after this battle, trolls as well. The Old Horde had recently toppled Stormwind, and had moved on to sack parts of the Dwarven territories in Khazmodan, using their spoils to build a fleet that would sail them to the southern shores of Lordaeron to continue their conquest of the continent. The humans got word of the invasion, so formed an alliance and mounted their defense in Hillsbrad. As they neared the shores of Lordaeron, much of the Orc fleet would be sunk by the Kultiran navy, but their force was so great that they still numbered in the thousands when their surviving vessels reached land, at the town of South Shore. A great battle ensued. The Alliance forces were commanded by Anduin Lothar, with the support of Dalaran mages, Antonidas and Khadgar, and the first of the Silverhand Paladins, Uther, Tyrion Fordring, Turalyon, and Sir Gavinrod. I won't go into great detail about the battle itself, but due to the Alliance's steadfast defenses, the Horde would eventually be defeated. However, they weren't eliminated entirely. Their war chief, Orgrim Doomhammer, ordered a retreat, where he led a smaller force in a raid on Durnhold Keep in eastern Hillsbrad to free the captured leader of the Amani trolls, Zul'jin, before retreating further into the hinterlands to regroup and plan their eventual invasion of the Elven lands at Quel'Tha Loss. After this battle and the conclusion of the Second War, Durnhold Keep would go on to operate as an internment camp for orcs that were captured throughout the Eastern Kingdoms. Thrall, the founder of the Horde as we know it today, was one of the orcs held at Durnhold, brought there as an infant when the internment camp's black-hearted leader, Aedalas Blackmore, found Thrall abandoned amidst the corpses of his recently assassinated parents. Thrall came of age in Durnhold, brutally trained as a gladiator, but also educated as a human. He would come to befriend the daughter of his wet nurse, Taretha, who would eventually take a liking to Thrall and assist in his escape. After his escape, Thrall would meet Grom Hellscream and learn from him the history and plight of the orcs on Azeroth, before going on to discover his roots, reuniting with the few surviving members of the Frostwolf clan in the Alterac Mountains. There, he would meet then War Chief Orgrim Doomhammer and learn the ways of shamanism. As part of a greater campaign to free the orcs interned throughout Lordaeron, Thrall returned to Durnhold Keep with Doomhammer and freed the imprisoned orcs, killed his former captor Blackmore, and leveled the keep with his newfound earth magic, which is why we find it in ruins today. After Thrall assumed leadership of the Horde and had amassed a sizable army of orcs in Lordaeron, he would gather them and leave the Eastern Kingdoms for Kalimdor to found the nation of Durotar. So with most of the orcs leaving Lordaeron, Hillsbrad saw a period of relative peace. Its farms and mines would go on to produce as usual, fortified by the area's militia, and the main port at South Shore would stand as a commerce hub, and a place where many well-known figures of Azeroth would pass through: Kel'Thuzad, Tyrion Fordring, Alexandros Mograine, and Arcanus Doan, or grow up there, like Sally Whitemane, Renaud Mograine, Herod, and Vishas, all of whom would go on to play important roles in the Scarlet Crusade. During the Scourge invasion, the vast majority of the foothills were spared from the catastrophes seen by the rest of Lordaeron throughout the Third War, a fate that can be credited to the actions of the people of South Shore, but we'll talk about that a bit later when we cover the notable quests of the zone. Only one location fell to the Scourge, Terran Mill, which eventually found itself controlled by the Forsaken, where they used the town as a forward base in their offensive against the surviving humans of Lordaeron. And that brings us to the situation we find Hillsbrad in during Classic WoW. Despite surviving the horrors of the Scourge invasion, Hillsbrad is seeing a return to its bloody roots as a central theater in the war between Alliance and Horde, although this time around, the primary aggressors look a little different. Instead of green-skinned orcs, the humans of Hillsbrad are set against the Forsaken, the reanimated corpses of the friends and family they once shared this land with. The Hillsbrad Foothills is another one of those classic zones that just bleeds nostalgia. Every zone does in its own way, but Hillsbrad is special. If you count the quests that send you to Alterac, it covers a wide span of levels, from the early 20s all the way up through the late 30s, and it excels at immersing you in that familiar feeling of high adventure that's typical of those level brackets, filled with anticipation and wonder, starting to see a more complete, appropriately statted equipment set, with maybe even a blue or two, and getting more of your class's core abilities. And even though it's a pretty Horde-dominant zone, quest-wise, to me, Hillsbrad has always delivered on that adventurous feeling, regardless of the faction. For the Horde, it's the first time you get to experience the coziness of a human zone without the dreary, haunted atmosphere you've grown accustomed to in Tirisfal and Silverpine. On the Alliance side, Hillsbrad has always felt mysterious. There aren't that many quests to do directly in the zone, but you'll be sent here on a handful of meandering quest lines that put you through South Shore. More so, it's a gateway to the rest of Lordaeron. South Shore is the final Alliance bastion in the northern parts of the Eastern Kingdoms, before it starts to give over to Forsaken and Scourge-controlled territories. And it's such a cozy place to hang out. If your party is gearing up for a trip to Shadowfang Keep or the Scarlet Monastery, chances are, South Shore is where you'll gather together for a quick rest and resupply before you venture off. You'll hang out on the docks or in the town center and just take in the vibes while you wait. And for that reason, it gives off a feeling of safety against a world of danger that awaits just outside, even if it is sometimes attacked by assassins or undead. But regardless of your faction, what Hillsbrad is really known for, more than any other low-level zone, or maybe any zone at all for that matter, is PvP. All kinds of PvP, honorable face-offs, salt-fueled rivalries, grief fests, or large-scale server-wide showdowns. It all happens in Hillsbrad. And I think it's a combination of the map design and level distribution that begets this sort of thing. Hillsbrad's map layout creates a highly trafficked crossroads in the middle of the map that extends along the main road leading west. Terran Mill, the Horde quest hub of the zone, sits in the northeast, while South Shore, the Alliance town, sits right in the center along the southern coast. The first handful of Horde quests in Hillsbrad start pretty low, around the 20 to 25 level range, and many of those quests send you west, into the clearing right above the main road and as far as the Hillsbrad Fields, a farming town that has plenty of destruction for Horde players to wreak, but whose NPCs are friendly to the Alliance. These days, it's not uncommon to find yourself fighting for mob tags against a mage who has laid claim to the fields for AoE grinding, but if you're lucky, you won't have too much trouble. For the Alliance, Hillsbrad is actually a higher level zone. Many of the quests aren't really relevant until your low to mid, even high 30s, and a lot of the quests originating in South Shore actually end up sending you north, all the way up to the Alterac Mountains. This is how the PvP escalations tend to start. An Alliance player headed for Alterac comes across a Horde player headed for the fields, and because he has a few levels on him, he decides to gank him. Maybe the Alliance toon decides to explore the zone some more later, discovers that the NPCs in the fields are all friendly to him, and then finds the low-level Horde player again and decides to gank him again. In fact, why not find a nice spot on the outer walls of the field's town hall and rain destruction down on Horde levelers from above? At that point, the Horde trying to quest are starting to get fed up. Maybe they log onto a main to come deal with the guy camping them, or maybe they call for help from their guild. A few Horde players come out for revenge on the ally, he calls his friends, and the next thing you know, half the players on the server, no matter what level they are headed to Hillsbrad to create a wall of death at the crossroads, and so the infamous Terran Mill vs. South Shore battles were born. The Terran Mill vs. South Shore showdowns were legendary, dozens of players on each side doing whatever they could to inflict damage on the enemy faction. Warriors charging in, paladins bubbling, mages spamming blizzard over the entire area, frame rates dropping. That level of aimless fun is almost never matched in today's modern gaming experiences. There were even attempts to recreate the battles during the 2019 Classic re-release, before the phase with Battlegrounds was put out. And it was fun, but it was halfway done to speed up the honor grind, which was painfully inefficient without Battlegrounds, and for that reason, it just didn't quite capture the carefree joy things like this exuded back in the good old days. And as soon as Battlegrounds were released, the reenactments more or less stopped. What I remember so fondly about these encounters in Hillsbrad, whether they were the full-scale battles or just dealing with someone who was camping me, was the fact that there was no shame in participating even if you were a complete low-level noob. You'd manage to do something like land a Frost Nova on a ? Rogue, while the higher level members of your faction did the actual killing, but when you saw the Knight Lieutenant kill hit your honor tab, you felt like you contributed something. And despite Hillsbrad existing in half my brain as an annoying gank fest I'd rather not get caught up in, deep down I love the zone, and I always welcome the happy-go-lucky PvP that can happen there, because I know it's only a matter of time until my 20s and 30s are well behind me, and I'm already feeling nostalgic for the PvP experiences I enjoyed during my leveling journey. Okay, on to the rest of the map. Outside of Terran Mill, South Shore, and the Fields, Hillsbrad has a few other things that make it memorable. It's bordered by Silverpine Forest to the west, Alterac Mountains in the north, the Hinterlands to the east, and the Arathi Highlands to the southeast. Most of those borders are memorable in and of themselves. The border with Alterac is one of the few zone changes in Classic WoW that happens gradually, to the point where you hardly notice it's happening at all. That adds a sense of mystery, exploration, and danger to Hillsbrad, where you might find yourself wandering north and randomly see the level range of the creatures change suddenly from yellow to red. Really, Alterac and Hillsbrad could be considered one zone due to the way the quests interweave between the two areas and the fact that there are no faction hubs in Alterac at all. But I figured it best I give Alterac its own retro in due course because it really is one of my favorite places in the game. The border with the hinterlands is also mysterious and intriguing. There isn't much reason to wander behind Durnhold Keep while you're leveling in Hillsbrad, but if you do, you'll see a couple of named griffins flying about. If you're Horde, they're aggressive and probably too high level to identify, serving as a warning against venturing too deep into the Wildhammer territory. If you're Alliance, they're friendly and serve as a marker of safe passage into intriguing new lands. And lastly, with Arathi Highlands, the ruins of Thoradin's Wall stretches across the border. I'll save its full history for the Arathi retro, and for now just mention that it was built by the Kingdom of Strom during their centuries-long war with the Trolls, built to keep them from invading their lands. Also, on the north side of the wall, there's a footpath leading through the rubble that leads to a Syndicate-controlled farm in Arathi, indicating the Syndicate forces throughout Alterac, Hillsbrad, and Arathi are using it as a smuggling route across the three zones. I didn't discover that or come up with that conclusion myself, so credit to Jedi Warlock who pointed this out in his 7 Wonders of the Eastern Kingdoms video. There are only 2 other points of interest worth mentioning to me. The first is Purgation Isle, a towering island off the southwestern coast of Hillsbrad that is littered with 57 plus elite spirit mobs, cursed paladins, mages, acolytes, monks, and clerics. For the longest time, these mobs were level 20-something and were assumed to have been part of cut content, but eventually they were changed to be high-level elites and included in the Tier 2.5 questlines. There's no confirmed lore reason for them being here, but I can only assume they're the ghosts of those who died during the Battle of Hillsbrad. And despite getting included in the tier questline, Purgation Isle is still a place full of mystery that just makes me feel uneasy. And lastly, there's Dungarock. Notable because, as far as I know, it's the furthest north dwarven outpost held by the Bronzebeard clan on the Eastern Kingdoms. I always thought it was cool to look up at the dwarven structures jutting out of the mountains so far from Khaz-Modan. And just outside of Dungarock, there's a gravestone monument overlooking the coast, with flowers laid out and a dwarf named Roosh kneeling at it, left here by the devs to honor a friend they played with who passed away. Roosh was his character. I mentioned earlier that most of the Alliance quests in Hillsbrad have their objectives set in the Alterac Mountains, and that for the most part, I'm going to save those quests for a standalone Alterac retro. But there's one I wanted to mention here because it does have some crossover in Hillsbrad, and that's the Syndicate Assassination event and the Assassin's Contract. Seemingly at random, a shadowy Syndicate assassin will spawn in South Shore, kill the town crier, and generally cause havoc in the town. Alliance and Horde alike can find themselves getting ambushed by these mobs in and around South Shore. They've even been known to break into the inn and attack players and NPCs in there. They're level 30-something mobs and several of them spawn at once, so they can be an issue for lower level players, but with some crafty play to get the guards involved or help from other players, you can kill them to find an assassin's contract. The contract reveals a hit on the magistrate of South Shore, and after cluing him in, he'll send you back to Alterac to deal with the person responsible for the hit in retaliation. There are just a handful of other Alliance quests with objectives set in Hillsbrad. They're not really memorable due to their stories or interesting events or anything like that, but I do have fond memories doing the kill and collect quests on the Murlocs and Nagas along the shoreline, which you do on behalf of a lazy guard named Farron, who refuses to do his job, and was reassigned to South Shore out of Stormwind. I just think that they're comfortable quests to do given that you don't have to venture far to complete them. In fact, if it's not crowded, you can probably even do them without losing South Shore to view distance. Good grindy quests, quick turn-ins, and a nice trip back to Stormwind at the end of it. What's not to like? The Horde side is a different story entirely. Their town, Terran Mill, might not be as cozy as South Shore, but it's comfortable in its own right, and their entire questing experience is memorable, with a lot more of it happening directly in Hillsbrad. The Horde have two main quest lines that take you from your early 20s all the way up through your 30s there. The Battle of Hillsbrad, given the same name as the battle that happened here during the Second War, which has you killing piles and piles of humans and their leaders throughout the zone, and the Elixir questline, which has you gathering various materials for a Forsaken apothecary, who has you use his concoctions to poison and corrupt the Alliance living in the area. There's a lot to remember within those quest chains, but the pieces I remember most fondly are the first Elixir quest, Elixir of Suffering, where you collect bear tongues and a creeper ichor from the spiders just outside of Terran Mill. And if you've ever done that quest, you know just how long it can take. You've probably found yourself grinding spiders for an hour or more at one point to finally find the ichor. The immediate follow-on, Elixir of Agony, has you take a concoction over to the Hillsbrad Fields and poison the farm dog Stanley with it. Usually you'll bundle the Stanley quest with your first quest at the fields too, which has you kill a bunch of farmers, farmhands, Farmer Ray and Farmer Getz, and collect a stack of human skulls while you're at it. Both of those chains ultimately lead you into the dwarf fortress at Dungarok, protected by elite mobs, where you're tasked with trimming their ranks, finding a low drop chance sword, and poisoning their commander's keg. But there's one Horde quest that to me outshines all others in Hillsbrad, and it's etched into the memory bank for both factions. I'm of course talking about Helcular's Revenge. Helcular's Revenge starts at Novice Thivand, an undead skulking about in the Terran Mill graveyard, who tells you about a necromancer he used to serve named Helcular, who was brutally killed by the people of South Shore after they discovered his dabbling in the dark arts. Helcular was attempting to transform himself into a lich, and had gotten pretty close to it before his neighbors found him out. Thivand isn't too happy about how his master was treated, and wants you to see through Helcular's plans and take revenge on the people of South Shore. So first, you set out to the Yeti Cave on Darrow Hill. Darrow Hill always seemed to be one of those areas I'd run into PvP, usually outside of the cave where initiating is a bit less risky, because the Alliance also have a quest that requires them to come here to collect Yeti fur. I always remember seeing the skeletons left by PvP victims at the mouth of the cave, which always added an extra sense of danger to the quest. Anyway, the cave system used to function as Helcular's hidden ritual lair. You have to go in and kill an ungodly amount of the Yetis who have taken root there, until you can find Helcular's rod, which he was using to conduct his transformation spell. You bring it back to Thivand and he sends you back to the caves to charge the rod in 3 ritual flames, one of them up the road a bit in Alterac, guarded by some higher level snow Yetis, and once you've done that, you can take the rod down to South Shore and thrust it into Helcular's grave where he was buried, reanimating him and triggering an event where he walks into South Shore, spawns skeletons, and attempts to kill everything in sight before being laid to rest again by South Shore's guards and any Alliance players who might have happened to be in town. This is such a nostalgic quest for me. I remember creeping up to South Shore for the first time, aggroing the guards myself and running away, trying again, aggroing again and dying, running back to my corpse and finagling my res to happen right on top of the grave so I could immediately turn in the quest and run away again before I caught the attention of the guards. Of course, I usually would aggro and die again, so I had to sit there dead to watch the carnage ensue. Helcular's Revenge is a truly unique quest. There aren't many quests in Classic where you get to overtly cause this kind of mischief, where you can antagonize the opposite faction without having to PvP directly. And on the Alliance side, it's always fun to see Helcular spawn and start heading toward the town. It makes the game feel alive, and honestly contributes to the feeling of safety in South Shore by contrast. Even if it's under attack, you know the guards are going to just swarm and kill whatever it is, so you can sit back and enjoy the show or join the fun. The other thing I think is great about Helcular's Revenge is its lore implications. I mentioned earlier that South Shore was spared the plague due to the actions of its citizens. Well, the thing that prevented the Scourge outbreak there was their lynching of Helcular. In Classic, you can find a book in the Scarlet Monastery, or anywhere that has those little lore books set aside, that talks about Kel'Thuzad and his plot to usher in the Scourge invasion. To do that, he founded the Cult of the Damned and appointed secret operatives within it to oversee the corruption of key towns in Lordaeron, usually liches, for example, like Araj the Summoner in Anderhall. Knowing that, you can read between the lines and surmise that Kel'Thuzad had picked Helcular for that role in South Shore, and actually it was later confirmed in TBC because you can see Kel'Thuzad walking around in South Shore with Helcular, talking about necromancy in the old Hillsbrad dungeon. So fortunately for the citizens of Hillsbrad, they got to him before he could complete his transformation and set the plague loose in their lands, which has allowed the zone to maintain its relative sense of peace, safety, and natural beauty. And that'll do it for Hillsbrad's quests. But before we wrap, let's chat through some of the notable rewards you can get from the zone. Unsurprisingly, there isn't a ton for the Alliance, since there's a higher concentration of Horde quests taking place in the zone itself. The only Alliance item I really felt like mentioning was the Yeti Fur Cloak from the quest Bartolo's Yeti Fur Cloak. Decent for agility users, but only if you haven't managed to find a better cloak elsewhere by then. For the Horde, there are quite a few more items. The Runic Darkblade is a decent two-handed sword, solid DPS and a slower speed, with a cool proc effect that can send a Shadow Bolt at your enemies. You can pick that up at the conclusion of the Battle of Hillsbrad Chain, when you're sent to the Undercity to inform Varimathras about your conquests against the Alliance in the area. The Orcish War Chain from the Durnhold Rescue Mission is an okay male chess piece for strength users, and the Skull Ring, which is a 3 stamina, 3 intellect ring from the Souvenirs of Death quest out of Terran Mill, is a solid equip for casters in their 20s. The Wanted quest Dangerous gives the Charred Wand, which at 22.2 DPS isn't a horrible choice, but my favorite item in all of Hillsbrad is actually the Hooded Cowl, a 33 armor common quality cloth helm that you get as a bonus reward from the same quest. These days, players tend to fill out their equipment slots a lot faster, through fishing or dungeon grinding, professions, or the auction house, so by the time you reach this quest in the modern day, you might have something better. But back in the good old days, the Hooded Cowl was often the first piece of head equipment people would get on any tune, even male or leather users, to the extent that it's kind of gone down as a symbol, or a badge of honor for the wonder bracket of WoW leveling, your 20s and 30s. Everyone was running around with their little red hoods, and you'd often see people sporting the cowl well into their 30s, until they finally get an upgrade out of STV or Scarlet Monastery or something. The Hooded Cowl is in a way a perfect encapsulation of the classic spirit. You would feel a huge sense of accomplishment over getting a simple, white quality cloth helm because at least you finally have something to fill the slot with. And strangely enough, the fact that everyone else had it too didn't diminish the appreciation you had for the item at all. And that's a feeling that I can't help but associate with the place you find it in, the Hillsbrad Foothills. So, to sum it all up, what is it that makes Hillsbrad memorable? Well, it's most known for its PvP, from small-scale skirmishes to server-wide bloodbaths in the form of Terran Mill vs. South Shore showdowns. Hillsbrad is a place where many have come to die over and over and over again. But to me, Hillsbrad is more than just PvP. For the Horde, it's a wonderfully efficient questing experience that gets you a good chunk of XP in your early 20s, then has you come back later on to tie up some loose ends, and gets you some decent equipment while you're at it. For the Alliance, it's less memorable as a great questing zone, at least for the quests that don't require a trek up to Alterac, but it is memorable for different reasons. It's a place where you can antagonize low-level Horde with plenty of built-in backup, but more so for me, Hillsbrad is memorable for Alliance players because South Shore is just a comfy place to be. Between the assassination attempts and the visits from Helcular, it's an exciting place to hang out, and I have many memories of doing just that, as I wait to gather with friends and party members there before setting off on a daring adventure into Horde territory or the Plaguelands. And ultimately, even though it's a fuller experience for the Horde, both factions experience something special in Hillsbrad, whether it's through aimless PvP, elite quests, or adventures with friends into far-off lands. There's a sense of anticipation, mischief, camaraderie, and adventure that to some extent can be experienced in any zone, but at the same time is so unique to Hillsbrad. It's something fleeting that you might only truly feel for a moment, when you're a fledgling adventurer just starting to come into your own, running around in your bright red hood in the great outdoors of the Hillsbrad Foothills. That's it for this one. What do you guys think of Hillsbrad? What are some of the best memories and adventures you've had there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me which zone you'd like to see next. I'll probably round out the top picks and post a poll soon to help me determine the next ones, so be sure to let me know. And before you go, leave a like and a sub if you're enjoying these. I really love making these videos, so I'll keep going as long as there's interest. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.